Welcome to this episode of Yogis That Inspire. Make sure you're well hydrated. Grab a great big glass of water. This is going to be a long and interesting one. I've got a beer glass here, but I filled it with water and some electrolytes. So I'm excited to welcome Brian Quinn. And Brian has been practicing and teaching Kundalini Yoga for over 20 years. He also teaches tantra and meditation. He's on a quest to access information that bypasses all agendas, which I love. And he studied a degree in physics from Princeton University. But what I love about him is he's an esoteric explorer, a digital craftsman, a reality hacker, which I am very keen for, and he's the creator of Liminal Yoga. So I'm just accepting Brian's request. Hi, Brian.
Oh, hey, made it.
Yeah,
Nice.
I was just giving your introduction and how I'm telling everyone how I love your the ability to use the mind to create a new reality and hack reality, which I'm very fascinated about. So thank you for coming on here to give us reality hacking tips and tricks to create our own imaginal world, which is what I love. It's very unique, and I think it adds another dimension to the yoga practice. In a non-physical way.
Yeah, a lot of the modern yoga, the traditions as they've entered the modern space have become much more about physical practice. And whether that's just like the kind of hathas that are just about showing up, doing some bends and leaving, but even in the more like, I guess, closer to the spiritual, is what most people would say, yoga, you often get the same thing in that you get this like what I call like mechanization of the philosophy. So it's like this posture is for this and this meditation is for this, and if you do this for X days then this will happen. And I'm not saying that there isn't, well, there's some merit in all of it, even just people who are just doing pure yoga for exercise, but like that's reductionist. That has sliced off a large component of what yoga was in context and in function. And that's something that's been interesting. It's interested me for a while, since those seeds were first planted in my head by both personal experience and a few kind of angel yogis who came across my way and dropped some ontological bombs in my head in a way.
Ontological bombs?
Ontological bombs, yes. I like, this is my word of the
What does it mean, ontological? I've never heard of that word.
Okay, right. There's two words that everybody needs to learn. They come from the world of metaphysics, right? The subject that like they used to teach, and when education, when humanities were regarded as highly as the sciences, but now they don't, unless you're fortunate enough to get a dash of that at university, usually. And the first is ontology. And ontology is the attempt to understand the nature of being. So you can reduce that to three questions that an early teacher of mine put to me, like, who are you? Where do you come from? And where are you going? And what are you doing here? And these are actually like so obvious questions, but they're so fundamental and so mysterious and difficult to answer, and yet like are largely ignored to our detriment, really. These are worthy meditations. You're not going to get like a one-word answer like, I'm me, and I'm here to deliver blah 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 to it. No, it's it's a whole, like, it's a rabbit hole, each of those questions. So ontology is the long established philosophy of trying to get behind that. Is the world just a bunch of material? Is it consciousness? Is it, what is it?
And I just wanted to tell the viewers as well that you have a degree in physics from Princeton University. So that's also infused in your mind when you deliver this almost quantum world exploration of liminal yoga. And Brian, can you please share like what inspired you to create liminal yoga?
Yeah, liminal yoga is a recognition that there's 1/3 of reality that's just completely ignored, even by modern spiritual traditions. And it's not completely ignored by the power structures at play and the way that they operate. And so you can think of the world as, in many ways, to slice up the world to get different understandings. But one of them is that there's 3 layers in a way. There's the physical world, materiality. The rules are quite fixed, laws of physics kind of thing. That's the one everybody agrees on science. It's the only one that modern materialist science recognizes. This is called materialism, if you think that that's all there is. Then there's the world of the mind and mental abstraction. And this is the kind of space where you can imagine a perfect circle and you can do maths around, you can kind of consider what that would be like and the implications of it. But there's no such thing in materiality. You can never make a perfect circle. And this, if you have any knowledge of like Platonic solids and that kind of Neoplatonism, that's the idea of mental abstractions. We spend a lot of time in mental abstractions on the computer. You're scrolling through a page. You feel like it's a certain space, a size to that page, but it's not. It's just pixels flickering. So you're in this mental abstraction of what that is. So those 2 worlds are very much promoted. But there's a third, and it's been talked about for centuries, millennia, and it was part of every culture until the modern era began to slice it out in the last 500 years particularly. And that's the world that some call the imaginal. And I prefer the term imaginal as opposed to imaginary, because imaginary and imagination are terms that are very much denigrated in our culture. We celebrate children, oh, look at their imagination, but then we're as quickly as possible, we erase it out of them. This is real, and that's not real. And the imaginal is this space that is somehow more material, more separate than the world of mental abstractions, which in some sense it's not all in your head, but it's kind of like you can control it, and is less rigid than the physical reality, where the rules and the laws are very hard to bend. And you can think about the space in the imaginal that we're all very familiar with, or most very familiar with, is the dream space. In dream logic, there is a logic to dreams, but it's not as fixed as the physical world. There are certain rules, but you can break them. Sometimes you can walk through a wall, sometimes you can fly, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you encounter things that are echoes of your day, sometimes you encounter things that seem to be separate from you. And this was something written about, and the term comes, there's an amazing paper worth a look up from the 60s called Mundus Imaginalis, which is some French academics studying Sufi, ancient Sufi writings. And they talk about the spheres of reality, and that the 8th sphere, when you cross into that, that is, you go to the place that in Arabic translates to the place that is no place. And so the concept of a very specific place you can go, but it is not, you can't ever get there through navigating the physical. No matter how far in space you go, how deep in the ocean, how much you travel, you can't get there. And moreover, it's not just like a third place is in the third point of the triangle, though it seems that way from maybe this perspective. But when you're in that space, you realize that it encloses the physicality. And this is a concept that comes up in Vedic understanding too, is that the physicality is a kind of trickling down, a precipitation of the imaginal. The implication being that if you can access the imaginal, then you have a perspective on the physical that's much broader, and you have agency to be able to manipulate it, have power over it. And this goes back into shamanic traditions and the witch traditions of this land, all that stuff working with the realms that kind of exist. And when you really experience them, you really have a profound sense of, this is not coming from me. And a lot of people have had experiences in dreams where sometimes it's, as I said, it can just be echoes of your day, mind garbage in a way. But every now and then you'll encounter something and have the distinct impression that, like, I didn't make that up. Like, you'll be surprised by it, surprised by the face, surprised by the thing it says, surprised by the vividness of the reality you're in. And that, it's a profound experience to realize there's something there that we can access. It's beyond the physical. Even if you believe it, to touch it is another level, really. So That's where liminal yoga is about. And it's realizing that at its heart, I truly believe that all yoga was concerned with this prior to the 19th century, when I won't take you down the whole history. I just wrote a 4-part blog post on my Proto-Futurist blog that you can link to in detail. But this this idea of combining yoga with science and medicalizing it is a very modern phenomenon. You won't find an ancient tantra saying if you do this, it heals your kidneys, despite what a lot of the modern gurus try to say. It may help your kidneys, clearly some, but they weren't concerned with that. They were concerned with altered states of consciousness, usually in the context of ritual. And that's the other part that is largely missing from the modern system, and was actually my initial entry. I sort of started thinking, where's our ritual? And what's the impact of having lost that? And that led me down a kind of Western esoteric path, which is very rich in ritual, but quite lacking in physical energy body work. So the liminal yoga for me is a kind of like reunification of the ability to really develop energy body and to feel that and to move it, and to bring in also these components of ritual, of interacting with spirit realities in a way that were very much part of all cultures until the modern era.
That it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, which is The Matrix.
Yes.
And it's
Fun.
yeah, it almost like we can hack this reality, switch into the next one, but the universe is mental. So by first mentally imagining it, you can create it.
I'd say the universe is closer to mind than to physicality, and mind can have these different layers to it. It's interesting, this you know, and intentions are very popular nowadays, which is, you know, good. But you could ask, like, if everyone's intending so much, either how come the kind of enlightened yogis haven't taken over running the show? And I would say it's because the intentions are just baby steps, like where the power behind them is a bit lacking. And if you read like stories of yogis of old and witches of old, you are struck by the power that they had. And there's a really great book actually about Native Americans called How We Used to Live. Go get this book, or the audiobook's brilliant. And it's just a collection of stories of like Native American, you know, kind of 100-year-old stories of the power of them encountering their spirit guides and then the things they did. And I think these stories are really important to have as part of your practice, because they tune you into what I believe was a reality that was much more magical, where the physical laws of the universe were much less fixed, and that relates to belief. So you can be intending what you want, but if you don't really believe it's possible, your intention isn't going to go very far, because the analytical part of the mind is kind of hijacks it. Or if your lust for the result is too strong, you're desperate for that money, and you keep thinking about it, it almost can like counteract the intention. So a lot of liminal work, you know, particularly in the Western esoteric space, is about how to refine that. So there's a thing called sigils you can kind of Google and look, where you create a symbol out of your intention, basically, and then you charge the symbol through a meditative process. And the idea is you forget what the original intention was, but the symbol embodies it, and then that you try to plant that into your unconscious, and that part of the mind is very powerful. It's very connected to the more fluid aspect of the universe through which intentions can manifest.
Ah, and is that like a yantra? You know, the symbols. Like I have some yantra, the yantra diagrams. Is that like what you mean? Like that can be a symbol?
The idea of symbols having power as concentrations of consciousness. So that's a big part of like esotericism, pre-modern world, and you know, in certain corners still modern world, is like how do you take it out of the analytical mind and give it a power that accesses these more subtle in-between layers, these, you know, subliminal space in the mind, because that's what influences you. It's like stuff that's in your unconscious manifests as like neurotic behavior. You know, if you have a trauma in your unconscious, you have deep-seated trauma, there's not much you can do about it analytically. You encounter someone who triggers that trauma, your whole nervous system freaks out, right? Like you can think like, no, I'm fine, it's all good, there's no problem here, I'm on top of it. But like your body has a whole different story. And that's because these are the deeper aspects of the mind have a much stronger, more primal grip on reality than your analytic mind. So symbols have always been about that, but they're kind of been, you know, a little bit lost, especially the Western ones, and maybe a little bit misunderstood for what they are. But there's a lot we can do with that, both meditating on symbols, developing our own symbols, connecting with symbols that relate to our either our cultural heritage or our place of, you know, where we reside, which is, you know, a whole mesh of different things nowadays. So yeah, symbol work. So that's one of the things I do in liminal yoga often is like in between physical exercises, have people visualize certain symbols, kind of construct them in their mind's eye. And that can be a surprisingly rich experience, especially for symbols that have, you know, gone back, people have meditated and reflected on for long periods of time.
Interesting. I've never come across that, but I suppose it would be like for example, in religion, they have the sign of a cross. You know, that's a symbol that people, or the mala beads, that could be another physical creation of the energetic
Yes.
symbolism.
Yes. And that's, you know, I would call that like doing a mala is a kind of liminal operation, because you have this physical, I like things that kind of cross this divide, you know, blurring the boundaries. It's just one of the things that psychedelics give people, is that it blurs the boundaries between these realms, you know, the liminal dream realm, imaginal realm, and physical reality. So anything you can do that does that is quite a useful exercise. Like, you know, even recording your dreams, or drawing a symbol or a thing you saw in your dream is taking something out of liminal space and putting it into physical reality. Doing a mala is taking something in a physical reality, moving the beads and reciting a mantra that's projecting into the liminal realm.
Ah, interesting. And
Yeah.
can you please share, like, we touched on it with the mala beads, but your journey of tapping into this energetic realm through the yoga practice? Like, how would one, you know, do that?
Well, as in what to do now, or my history.
Well, we can start with your history and of tapping into the energetic realm, like, because you created this, right? You coined the term liminal yoga, and yeah, like, when did you know you could tap in, like have this feeling to the energetic realm through, in specific, yoga, you know?
Mm. Yeah. For me, I reached a point where I felt that the rigidity through which like yoga was delivered was a problem, and at least for me and where I wanted to go. And I also felt that in that space, there's a lot of like pejorative talk about like special experiences. So I remember like I started having out of body experiences when I was a teenager, and that was my first entry into looking at this. And this was the dawn of the internet, and there was this thing called Usenet, which is the original forums, but you know, free from all kind of commercial interest. And it was such a brilliant source of information. I found others who were having similar experience, and so I, you know, I didn't freak out and think there was something wrong with me. I knew it wasn't. I knew there was something special going on with reality. And yeah, so what was I saying? That was my, yeah, so I knew that that was a reality. But when you come to the certain kind of yoga world, I remember when I first mentioned this to a teacher who was a big influence, and she's like, oh yeah, the whole point is to stay in your body and not to leave it. And I kind of get this whole like, yeah, you know, you're here on earth to do earth, but like earth isn't just this physical materiality. And I always felt that that was one of the weird things of the modern world, is it just denies that whole, for me, a very important part of reality. And at the same time, I felt that the yoga practices were conducive to that. So doing certain meditations or operations, you know, of yoga, for me, give me a very tangible feeling of the separateness of the energy body, if you will, from the physical body. and that lying in relaxation after having done yoga was a much more potent place to start from to do this kind of body separation kind of work. That was one entry, and the other was a weird little comment that I spent some time studying with a Naga Baba in India, a really interesting guy who'd been a Westerner. He went into India in the late 60s and ended up in a very austere tradition that had no foreigners. A really wild story, autobiography of a sadhu, if you want to check it out. Really fascinating read. And he said, like, remember you had a lot of like hater talk about the modern yoga world, and everybody, I mean, a little too much, I thought, but like the more, as farther I get on, the more things he said like kind of germinate in my mind. And one of them is like, pranayama in yoga was never meant to be used outside of Vedic ritual. And I thought, really? Like, are you serious? And so I just let that comment sit. I didn't really own it or reject it. And then we were in a havan, which is a 3-hour fire offering ceremony in this temple in Karnataka, amazing place called Sri Mukambaka Temple. And it was just our little group and the 5 Brahmins that were running it. And there was the main fire pit and the Vedic mantra, and things would get thrown in. And then there was a little temple on the side with a kind of sand mandala and like a shrine that was, I believe, to some goddess, maybe Saraswati or something like that. And there was, every now and then, one of the Brahmins would go over there and do a separate set of mantras. And in between, they'd be doing like alternate nostril breathing and little like pranayama and posture things. And that kind of, again, just interesting after the comment that had been said before, but I didn't really pay much mind to it. And even quite recently, that's come back to me, and I've thought like, the potency of doing energy body work in the context of ritual is vast, is a whole world of consideration, because ritual is about directed consciousness for intent, right? Like, it's one thing to sort of, say your intention in your head. It's another to coin a whole theater around that intention. And that intention may even surpass your own individuality. It may be like, I intend to I don't know, in a Western space, embody the attributes of like Hercules, I need strength, or Venus, like, or to call in Cupid to sort of deliver me. It's like, and then create a whole theater with sounds and sights and hypnotic mantra maybe and incenses that completely seduce the whole sensory body. Combine that with like energy body practices like asana, pranayama, meditation, you've got something quite profound. And that, I kind of feel like that's what yoga was before it became this like little medicine box of personal development in a way. And again, I'm not hating on that, like valuable contribution to the modern world, but dangerous in its belief that that's what yoga is and nothing else. And it isn't just the West. India has the same thing. This has been happening since like the whole kind of Indian exceptionalism of the 20th, 19th century with the Theosophic Society. And again, check out these 4-part blog posts to kind of have that, to go down that rabbit hole. But like, there's a current colonization of the liminal, and its primarily mode of operation is Netflix. I'm always hating on Netflix, so I kind of love Netflix too. We have liminal, the space is fully occupied, but it's being piped full of other people's dramas. Yeah. The stories are maybe very entertaining and very cleverly crafted, but are not always necessarily promoting of a harmonious and empowered inner space and community, right? Whereas the mythologies of old had really a lot more depth. I just watched this movie called The Mists of Avalon, and it's supposedly based on a book, and it's like a better rendition, more accurate rendition of the Arthurian legends from the perspective of Morgan Le Fay, who was the kind of head priestess of Avalon. This is the Glastonbury mythos. And man, that was a real head spinner, that thing, because there were so many layers and things going on. And afterwards, you're just left with a kind of profundity and a sense that things have kind of been wired in your mind that you don't even realize. But for the for the good rather than for the box office. And so I really feel like the potency of modern media and the entire lack of awareness of our dream space and of the liminality that's actually existing even when we're awake is a dangerous colonization of consciousness and control. I don't think that's an accident. So I feel like it's not just kind of cool to like, oh, let's go, you know, explore the imaginal, because, you know, because it's kind of cool, but like it's imperative. Like we have to fight back this secret colonization of our deepest, the layer that affects us most deeply in our day-to-day perceptions and living.
That's profound. And that's why I'm very intrigued with your practices, because I'm questioning everything I've been conditioned to believe more recently. Everything. And once I'm realizing the power of the subconscious and these layers of my mind that I haven't explored, I'm very careful about what I expose my mind to, even more than before, because it's so powerful. And I didn't realize that until recently. Whether that's, I don't even watch Netflix anymore, you know, I want to choose what I'm seeing and gaining information through my eyes, because it is so powerful that I don't even watch the news anymore because and I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm still on this journey, but I don't want to put my mind in a state that is it's going to influence my decisions, because then I'm like, is that me, or is that someone programming my mind subtly? And these subtle influences, whether that's the media, social media, advertisements that you're just bombarded all the time, they add up and they add up, and then they influence you. And whether that, I want to choose as best I can what I'm influencing my mind to, so I use my energy the most, like, I guess consciously, if it is. And I'm like, is that me making this decision, or is that an ad that was implanted into my mind that encouraged me to make this decision? You know, with what I'm buying, what I'm purchasing, the social constructs of society, you know. So this is why I didn't realize the power of this sheath layer that's invisible, but it's so real and can have a ripple effect very quickly into the physical reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And people in positions of power have been talking about this. I've been aware of this for a long time. I opened that workshop that I did at the And Beyond Festival with a line from Edward BERNAYS' book called Propaganda. And the line, Edward BERNAYS was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who came to America and formed what was basically invented the PR industry, public relations industry. And his influence was behind, I mean, yeah, a lot of crazy stuff, some of it quite dark. And his book, the first paragraph, chapter 1, go get it, it's on archive.org, it's called Propaganda, Edward BERNAYS. Just read the first paragraph, and, you know, paraphrasing, it's roughly like a fundamental, yeah, you tell him, Lily.
Yeah.
The fundamental part of, basically a fundamental part of a modern democracy is being able to control the masses through their minds. I mean, that's, and it's even worse than that, his opening line. It's much more sinisterly specific, and the book is an elaboration on how that's done. And the way that's done is through the subconscious. It's through the stuff that's in you and informing your perceptions and your decisions based on stimuli without you being aware of it. It's not in your conscious space, and you know, it's modern psychology kind of demonstrates again that people aren't self-consistent beings. They think they're this way, but in reality this way. You know, everyone thinks that they're above average kind of thing. You know, that sort of stuff. You get that a lot, and the reason that is because of unawareness of our subconscious. And there's a reason why sex sells is the maximum of advertising. You can take something that has absolutely nothing to do with the car whatsoever, and then attach it to a car and then somehow sell. That's because there's a whole world in the subconscious, because, you know, sex is one of those topics we don't talk about in public kind of thing, sex and money. And and it's there, but it's alive in you, and it's informing you, and it's forming your desires and your repulsions and your fears and your things. And so all it takes is a little step, a little symbol, a little image to influence you, and you won't even be aware of it. You just see it passing on the subway, and it'll trigger some weird, maybe a little insecurity, and then it'll make you feel like you need something, and you'll go and buy a fucking smoothie or something from McDonald's, or, you know, it's like, this is how it works. And it's, you know, people in power have been thinking about this a long time. I've done a lot of work in tech for strategy companies, like media strategy companies. For whatever reason, there was a period of time where I was doing all these contracts for media strategy companies, big ones, multinational things. And it's like, there's teams of highly educated, intelligent people who are all working their ass off to figure out how to basically hijack your subconscious mind. That's not what they call it. They've got lots of clever words, so nobody really feels too bad about it. You know, they're all just trying to earn their living. I'm not hating on the individuals, but like the force that is the modern media machine is very much designed to hijack you. And this is why practices like self-awareness practices and emotional release practices, where you then clear out some of these hooks in you, are very liberating. Self-sovereignty. Agency is one of my favorite words now. Agency. It's how much agency do you have in your life? Like, you want to do something, can you do it? Can you afford it? Do you have the kind of, I don't know, connections or space or knowledge of where you are to be able to move to that space? Or are you stuck? And agency is sovereignty. And if you don't have agency, to the extent that you're lacking agency, you're just a slave to the system, or a pawn thrown about by the tides of reality. And we all are to some degree, but there's definitely much more agency we can have.
And I think that's very powerful. Like, the strongest form of manipulation is when you don't know you're being manipulated.
Yeah, of course. That's what the book's about. It's like how to manipulate people that don't even know they're being. Yeah, I love the I don't love, but the amazing example from BERNAYS one. This is like, if the Adam Curtis documentary Century of Self is where I first heard of BERNAYS. He's this famous he's like this weird BBC like rogue documentary maker who seems to make all the documentaries about like the reality of what goes on behind power. And for some reason, BBC is more than happy to play. So I don't know how that all works. But Adam Curtis documentary is all worth watching. Century of the Self was the one, and in there it tells this story where cigarette company. So this is like, it's women's suffragette period, 1920s, America mainly, but everywhere really. And the only men smoked. So cigarette company execs are sitting around like, gosh, if we could just get women to smoke, we would double our profits overnight. So they hire BERNAYS. And BERNAYS, you know, using his knowledge from his uncle, gives them a tip. And he's basically like, you've got to like, I don't know, something involving kind of like penises and cigarettes, you know, as kind of Freud thing. But either way, what it led them to do was to stage there was a big suffragettes march in, I don't know, Chicago or something like that. And so they hired a bunch of it girls, you know, like kind of upper class young ladies. And they got them to all get into the march, and on cue, they would all whip out a cigarette and light it up, which women didn't do, right? So these were like society women, you know, very beautiful, very like, you know, nicely dressed, the kind of things that other women aspire to, like in glossy magazines now. And they got them all to like, and all the press were ready. So there's this classic photo, you can find it, of these women marching, looking like they're standing up for suffragettes, lighting up, all staged by the tobacco companies in order to do what it did very successfully, which is establish cigarettes as a point of individual power for women, and then they all started smoking. This is the 1920s, people. Like, we've had 100 years to develop this stuff.
Yeah. And then just now with time, can you imagine, it's just getting more and more sophisticated. And this is why I must, like, this is why I always try to have a spiritual practice, a yoga practice, because now that I know this information of how powerful my mind has been conditioned, I'm questioning everything. I'm almost reversing it little by little. And I'm noticing the effects like on my body, like with the food that I'm eating the last 2 years. You know, I'm not consuming as much of the foods that I thought was healthy. I'm changing my whole perspective. And this is why I think it's so important to have like a practice, whether it's whatever that may be, but for me it's yoga. And now I think now more than ever before in the world, we need to infuse like almost we need to have a catalyst to the yoga practice, because I feel like the world needs it. And I think liminal yoga can be it, you know, to quickly rewire or like remove those hooks and infuse, I guess, our own sense of awareness. um right, I think the world needs people to be more conscious. And I can only do that for myself, and I want to share this aspect because I think it's so powerful to undo the conditioning that has been done for so like more and more. It's becoming more and more artful and more deceptive to people. Right? That's what I think. It's been more and more deceptive, and people don't know. And I think if you don't know, like, sorry, what I'm saying is, if you don't have this practice or this strong grounding in this and understanding, then you're almost prey. You're easy prey, and your life will be dictated for by people you don't even know.
Yeah. And moreover, you're going to be, you know, to try to like kind of bring it around and up a bit in a way, like you're going to be outsourcing your capacity for joy and
Yes.
ecstasy and bliss to, and this happens, you know, it happens in spiritual practices. Like as you were saying, like, you know, your thing's yoga, and I was like, that it kind of flicked something in my head. And I thought, the thought came to me was like, I think we're at a point, we have to be radically non-allegiant. Yoga, you do your yoga, but then also do your like your kind of emotional clearing work, and do your somatic therapy, and be absolutely ruthless with cleaning out, or whatever your preferred analogy is, like the shit that bugs you. Like, really face it. That was a big one for me, because I had 20 years in yoga practice, and I was like, there's still certain things that still bug me. Insecurities, like, kind of areas where I feel like I don't have the agency that I should have, and you know, struggles with, you know, getting into that joy and ecstasy space. And I looked around, I saw others that I felt the same, who also been doing things a long time, and I was like, no, you know, the problem is here. I haven't fully faced. You know, I've allowed the practice and the allegiance to the practice to kind of take over my sense of what's really going on. And so this is why I sort of, you know, I picked up this phrase recently. One of the goals in life, the goal of healing is to become emotionally current, right? So for most people, we encounter something and there's our reaction to it. So maybe partner, like, you know, says something that's mean, or didn't wash up something, and, you know, whatever. And whatever your trigger is. And, you know, there's the situation. Maybe, you know, they told you should wash it up, and now you're feeling they're hypocrites. You need to say something, right? I don't know. Like, but then there's also like all this other stuff. There's the time that your mother did this, and there was the time that, and there's a feeling that you have no time in life because you aren't living your dreams, and all this other stuff is right there informing your reaction to that situation. And so your reaction, your outer reaction, is probably going to be disproportional to the reality, because you're not emotionally current. You're stuck in the past. You're stuck in worry of the future. And that's absolutely fundamental to any form of spirituality. And I used to think that they were kind of separate. Like, you have to have the, you know, do your emotional work, and you do your kind of like transcendental meditation stuff. But I've realized that no, like the power that's blocked by like our emotional hangups is the power that blasts you into the liminal space. You know, I just came back from a week doing a really incredible kind of shamanic tantra training, and a lot of it was emotional release stuff, and like rituals to kind of encounter, you know, traumas and relationships in the past, and consent and stuff like that. And I've never had so many like vision experiences, because that energy was being released through those really challenging emotional encounters, profound experiences and highs and lows, was fueling the liminality, was fueling like vision, was fueling perceiving, you know, all kinds of wild stuff. And so it's like they're not separate, they're fundamentally intertwined. your emotional world is so important to get to grips with. And it gets so reduced in modern spirituality. Like, you know, I come from a tradition where they have one, am I allowed to swear here? One,
No,
one freaking line of,
you can say fruit.
one freaking line about emotions. And it's like, you know, convert emotion to devotion. It's like, FFS, like, okay, I get it. Yeah, like there's a whole thing of like, you know, being able to kind of offer up like what isn't yours. That's a, you know, that's a ritual to something higher. Like, cool, you know, put that one in your pocket, use it. But like, it just ain't that simple, mate. Like, that is not enough. It's like saying you've got like, oh, your garden's full of like really nasty weeds, and it's like somebody says, well, just turn the weeds to plants. And it's like, well, okay, yeah, I can call the weeds plants, but like, I want to grow some fruit for my, you know, I want to grow some food for my community. I want to grow some nice flowers. I can't. You know, I feel like the imperative, the importance of the self inner emotional space gets downplayed in modern spiritual traditions. And that's something that, not all of them, but some of them. And I say that as a warning, like, get really real with what bugs you. Like, where do your insecurities come in? Where do your fears and worries come in? Like, jot these things down, face them. And you don't have to face them alone. You don't have to, like, you know, go into your trauma space, but, you know, seek out the practices ruthlessly beyond any allegiance to genre that are going to get you that emancipation, because that's going to fuel your spiritual practice far more than any technique, any outer sort of philosophy. To that extent, so like, you know, I mean, when I first started doing in liminal yoga, for me, it's just like, I started doing this thing, like, how do I claim something that's my own, so I don't have to like feel encumbered to any rules or procedures. But to me, like, it includes dancing. It includes like, you know, moving like stuck energy in the body. It includes like liminal or imaginal confrontations with like your parents or, you know, other places of unresolved relationships. It includes like, you know, emotional release tools of like, you know, screaming into your hand, like stuff that gets to the heart of like what is alive in you and what is stuck, and releasing that is all part of it. You know, that's, yeah.
That's interesting because I really, more so now than ever before, I want to be a source of my own energy and a source of my own healing.
Yeah.
And interesting you say these because I also spend my time doing yoga, like myself. You know, I'm not going to a teacher or anything now, and I'm also exploring what is my innate need right now to heal, or innate to move. You know, how should I move to heal or move this energy, and just what comes from organically rather than seeking it externally. And I'm not disregarding external sources of healing. I'm saying they all have their path, but this is the journey I'm on now, so that I am more in control of my being.
Yeah.
And in healing even my own relationships, like with my parents, which has been very like hard the last 2 years to not carry that hurt and the pain from my parents and have that ripple effect in areas in my life, you know, to be
Yeah.
able to and be aware of it, but heal that part in my brain and my body. And whether I don't know if I can, I mean, they're my parents, their genetics are in me, you know, so whether I want to believe it or not, I do believe that you pick up their traits through their genetics, and you can manipulate it to a certain extent, but it's harder.
Yeah.
if you know your parents have certain, and also growing up with them, they're infused in your subconscious again, right?
Yeah.
um
Yeah. And that's
and
why a lot of so a lot of the angles in come through the conscious analytical mind. So it's like, oh, go to a therapy session and talk about your painful experiences. And there's some merit in that sometimes, definitely. Some necessity in it sometimes. You sometimes just need to speak and be heard, right? Like, that's a powerful healing thing. But there's also like the other layers, like the more liminal layers don't work that way. you'll never get to them. In the same way you can't like run a mile and end up in the other world, like the underworld. You just it doesn't work. No matter how far you run, you never get there. And this is where like ritual or like symbolic or if you're a fan of JODOROWSKY, psychomagical acts come into play, where it's like you might take like, I don't know, like some sort of like dank sort of piece of wood or something like that, and then like put it in the center of the room and like surround it with like some, I don't know, something black, and then like spend like, an hour screaming all the things at it that, you wish you somehow wanted to scream at your parents or somebody like that, and then take the thing and like, bury it in some sort of place that's going to get regenerated into a tree. Things like that actually access layers that are your analytical mind can never get to. And the more clever they are, the more they sort of speak symbologically rather than purely logically, the better the more effective they can be. And that tier is very important. And there's a lot of that happening now through like the kind of broad genre of embodiment work. And sometimes under the banner of shamanism gets that a bit. But like that stuff's really important. And this is where it's like, it doesn't matter what your philosophy is. So you have a philosophy of like, take your emotions and offer them up to your shrine kind of thing. It's like, yeah, that can help, but it's still coming through the head. It's still coming through like, I got this thing, I'm gonna, it's kind of, that some of that stuff is more deeply rooted in us than we care to admit. But the knowledge of it's always there. Like whenever you're feeling triggered, whenever you're feeling, small or weak or bothered or whatever's doing that, that's your sign. And as long as it's there, the sign that you've cleared something is that you can engage in scenarios that before would have made you kind of shrink or whatever your trauma reaction is, and then you don't anymore. Not because you're like, I'm gonna face this. It's because it's just not even there anymore.
Yeah.
It just happens. And that we have to, I think, always be ruthlessly face that, because otherwise what happens, you've been doing yoga 20 years and suddenly like you're that sort of, expert, or you've got like a lot of students and, you're running trainings and everyone's projecting onto you that you're this person who's sorted their life out, but you still haven't solved your most basic trauma picture, relationship with your parents. I've seen this. I had a teacher, a really bad relationship with her parents, rather hard upbringing, masked behind the veneer of kind of everything's all right. And like that stuff was still very alive in that person, even though they were being regarded as this very like highly developed teacher, and it come out really in really nasty ways sometimes. And we all have to accept like we're all in this together, actually. And we have to be ruthless with our healing. Be ruthless.
I'm in that place. That's why I like it, being ruthless with my healing, because I'm transmuting the anger that I have with my parents with like understanding and compassion. Well, I'm trying to, and having that intention when interacting with them is something that I'm focusing on now, so that I'm not responding with anger. And if I am angry, then take some time. Like, this is practice. I take some time and then I revisit the situation or the scenario. But I didn't realize like how profound it impacts my life. And rather than fighting it, I'm just like, whether it's the type of friends that I have, the type of partner I have, rather than fighting it, I just accept it. I accept this is who I am. This is my history, and I'm not resisting love, if that makes sense. That can come in different ways. I'm not resisting to it, I'm opening to it, but I'm aware that this is why I love this way. This is why I hurt this way, because it stems from my parents. And I'm still doing that way. I don't know. I think it's a never-ending journey.
But that's a really important point, is accepting. I remember a very quite developed yogi once said, the only difference between you and me is that I accept my faults. And it was quite a shocking statement, really, because this person seemed to have a lot of power. And but a really profound one actually is that it's not the trauma that's the worst thing. It's that our shame from it and our attempt to like turn our heads from it causes the bigger problem. And so after a while, it's like, you know, you might not ever, if you had a really deep wound, you know, I was given up at birth. Like, so I have this like abandonment issue that goes back to 0. Like it goes to 3 days old. Like I'm never going to, I don't know, maybe you know, I imagine there's always going to be part of me that I'm in a scenario where it's superficially resembles like a potential abandonment. My body's going to like go into a state, right? That's but the difference is that, you know, now compared to before, it's like, oh, there's that scenario, oh, there's that feeling. Okay, here you are, that's cool, you know. And it's where before it's like I'm just unaware of it, and it's like I'm suddenly feeling really insecure and freaking out inside, but trying to be cool and trying to keep it, you know, put up this personality facade. And it's like that's where all the mess comes from. So self-acceptance is a huge part of healing. It doesn't mean you can't like work to improve things, but it does mean like you don't do it from like I'm crap and I need to be better. Like you gotta drop that. I'm great, and you know, life is just gonna get better.
And I think that, like, rather than suppressing or shunning that side, if we openly express it and openly release it, you heal quicker and you move on quicker. And there's less time spent in that state of grief or anger or pain or hurt. If you just allow, and this is what I just do now, like, if I feel like crying, I just cry. I don't hold myself back anymore. Because I realize that time, and even if I'm being like efficient with my time, I'm better off just doing it when I feel it rather than hiding and releasing it later when it's more decorum to, you know?
And that's an opportunity. And you know what, like one of the things I kind of learned recently is like how little we make sounds and how crazy it is, because the body always wants to move in a certain way or make sound. And like you can cry and cry, but you can also like roar. You can start crying and just be like, maybe you don't feel like effing crying right, and so then you're like, "Argh! Argh! Argh!" you can do that, and it's so good, and it's so cathartic. And then afterwards, you know, get some pillows and lean against the wall and close your eyes and like, you know, see what's behind them. You know, you might find you're suddenly transported to quite a different space of consciousness. And the end result, you'll come out feeling a whole lot better. And so to give yourself license to cry and to shout and to like pound pillows and to, you know, pillow scream is one of my favorite things. You take a pillow and put it over your mouth so the neighbors don't freak out so much, and scream or say or swear, you know, like the things that, you know, you kind of want to say, but you don't really, because you don't really want to hurt the person, right? Like, you know, get it out. It's so good. And it's so powerful. It reclaims your personal power, that kind of thing. Holding it in is just zapping, just creates these sinkholes of energy.
Yeah. And I read, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I just saw a little story on Instagram that but I feel it, like when you play, this is a little bit off topic, but when you play and learn something or do something that you're trying, you absorb it 20 times quicker, and you need less repetition to do that, rather than if you're doing it just for the sake of doing it, to learn a new trait or learn a piece of information or how to do a pose. What's your take on that?
Yeah, and this ties right back into this idea of where I started feeling that the rigidity of like, even, you know, a yoga class in general was starting to feel stifling. And what that then leads you back is to a kind of, to ritual in a way. And ritual doesn't necessarily have to be like prescribed form. You can think like ritual in theater. If you're not familiar with ritual, just think theater, because theater is the original ritual, theater, ritual, you know, very intertwined. But you know, like modern forms of theater where there's like an improv angle, or there's like, it's just pure like panic theater, like JODOROWSKY, where you don't really know what's going to happen. You just have some like kind of setups, and then it all just goes wild. It's like, there's great power in that. This is the kind of Orpheus, in the Orphic kind of mysteries, traditions of the Greeks, as opposed to the Hermetic, which is much more kind of structured in a way. How can we bring that play and that spontaneity into the esoteric practices, into the yoga to the asana, to the meditation. Like, you know, what if that, how can we just like break the normal structure of go in, open it up, do some asana, shavasana, maybe meditation, go home, you know, how can we just like drop a bomb in that and like come into something that's much more like, and yet isn't entirely like, you know, you can go to like ecstatic dance and that's cool, but that's like totally open form in a way, like, you know, you do whatever you want, move how you want, within reason, you know, to a degree. Like what is the space in between those that we can explore? And I think that's there's a lot of real potential and power in there, but challenging to navigate and to facilitate, because everybody's coming with a different sort of starting point in a way, and different openness and self-expression. But that's where real power lies, I think, in writing, perceiving and writing the energy. DJ, you know what I mean? Like DJ doesn't come to the club with like, here's my 50 records I'm going to play tonight. Like they're like, what's grooving now? How's it feel? Put on this one, will get them moving. Like, okay, they need to calm down now so we can build to that next thing later. And I'm going to put this one. Do you know, like that? That's how you move energy. You know, having a sort of one size fits all paint by numbers yoga class, it, you know, still work. It's just not, you know, we can do better in a way. And that's what excites me now, how to do that. And to forget it's even yoga class and where it's okay, maybe we need to dance now. Maybe we need to like, you know, do wild dance with the person who's irritating us right now. You know, like some sort of like jungle standoff type thing. Or maybe we need to, I don't know, just lie on our backs, you know, for a while and imagine like colors running through our body. Or maybe we need to sit in this asana for like 5 minutes until we're all shaking, kind of thing. I don't know, you know, it's all taking all these tools that we have from many different places and being like, what is required now, and playing with it, you know, without any real like, oh, it must be a certain way. It could be a lot more fun.
This is another thing that I heard at the And Beyond retreat. I think it was you or Dema that said, you know, I want to ask more about the imaginative power. Is 70, like if you just imagine yourself doing a pose or an asana, I think I remember him saying that, or you saying, I can't remember who it was, that you get 70% of the benefits just by imagining.
Yeah.
Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, that's what I used to say. Nowadays, I probably wouldn't say the percentage because that's coming from somebody else. So you know, how do you measure these things? But the idea is right. That if you know, and the experiment to do is to you know, sit and take like a, you know, a set of asanas, a kriya or whatever, and just set your timer for however long that would be if you were doing it physically, and don't do it physically, but imagine it. But imagine it like in as rich a detail as you can for the whole time. Now, first thing that's going to hit is that's going to be very hard, because maintaining your attention span for that long is very challenging. And part of what the Liminal Yoga is about is developing that like imagination muscle, to be able to be richer in its viscerality and its tangibility, and also to be able to hold it longer, concentration, which is a prerequisite to meditation and the 8 limbs path. So there's that, and if you do, but even if you kind of attempt that, well, I was surprised to find, don't know, you can't speak for everybody, the energy moves, and it feels like you're doing it to a degree, or it moves energy in the same way. And the other angle on that maybe is a bit easier is that you can get into doing yoga, and once you've done it a lot and you're just familiar with it, your mind will start to wander a lot more. In the beginning, it's all very fresh and new, so your mind is quite attentive to it. So if you can work to bring your mind into like what you're doing, being very aware and running through the body and what feels what, like what, where, like that increases the potency of the practice so much. Like the mind's involvement is huge. You know, that, and this is like, you know, people, who's the guy, Joe Dispenza?
Yeah, Joe Dispenza.
He basically healed his spine through that. You know, he just sat, couldn't move, he had a spinal injury. Something like 3 hours a day, he would imagine his spine like regenerating, and lo and behold, it did. And now he's a, you know, a real big force in the world for that. So,
I didn't know that. I didn't know Joe Dispenza had a spinal injury.
I think that's how he started, unless I'm convoluting him with somebody else.
He's a neuropsychologist.
Is he? Yeah.
Neuroscientist, I think. I can't remember.
But maybe that was how he started, or maybe he was a neuroscientist, and I don't know. Yeah,
I'm
fact check that one. Fact checkers. But I
yeah.
did see that about somebody, either him or in his like kind of ilk on the documentary. You know, that's been known for a while. You know, like cancer patients kind of visualizing their white blood cells zapping all the cancer cells and then going into remission, kind of thing. So there's definitely space. The power of the mind as an access point on reality, and the ability to influence physical reality even, is a space that's always been talked about in esoteric lands amongst yogis and mystics and Native American shamans. It's only in the modern day that we've developed a belief system that that isn't possible. And this is why I think it's really important to be attuned to the paranormal stuff. You know, I bought this little lovely book of like haunted inns in Devon, you know, all within like kind of 50 miles from me, and they're all, it's just all very modern. These are like kind of, you know, pub owners who are quite sentimental bunches in a way, at least in the book. They all start off like, oh, I didn't believe in any of this stuff, but like, you know, I went down the other day and the furniture was all stacked on top of each other and a glass flew off the shelf, so I know there's stuff, you know what I mean? It's like, it's you read these things, or you look at like the research of people like Dean Radin, who are doing very like high science double blind experiments on things like the effect of prayer on food, and you know, measuring like people's response to that in a way, and then getting like um, very distinct and probabilistically meaningful and repeatable like results on something that just should not be possible by materialist science. Like being aware of that stuff helps break the hegemony that's been implanted in our minds, really, that physical
Can you
reality is
share?
fixed.
Sorry to
Mhm.
interrupt. Can you share the benefits of prayer on food?
Yeah, that was Dean Radin, is the scientist. I haven't read his books yet; they're on my list. But really great podcast on rune soup. Couple of podcasts with Dean Radin, DEANRADIN, Rune Soup, very good podcast, where he talks about a lot of that stuff. There was like we did it once in kind of, I think like Thailand with some Buddhist monks, and he did it in, I think, in America. There are all kinds of wild experiments they're doing with non-locality and the influence of the mind over matter, but with like, you know, like double blind, sort of full scientific method stuff, and you know, published in sort of academic journals. I mean, clearly, like modern super mainstream science isn't going to like say, oh, you know, we accept this, but like it's, you know, it's proper science. Or you know, anything that just gets you to when you read something like those ghost stories books, you're pressed by the truthfulness of it. It's hard to read that book and then be like, oh, these people are all just mistaking, you know, it for natural phenomenon, or they're all just lying, or they're all trying to. The quality of the writing kind of, you know, fairly fully convinces you otherwise, and so you're left with a belief that there's things that our material understanding of the world that we've all been indoctrinated into through education isn't sufficient to describe all the experiences that people are having right now, here and today. And that helps break this rigidity, which helps access, you know, like magic and intentions and all this sort of mind over matter space is fundamentally based in belief. And if you believe things can't happen, they won't, because you know, if you believe, I don't know, if you believe you can't sleep without having a nightmare, you probably have nightmares, right? Like the dream logic obeys your belief space much more than physical reality. So breaking, you know, breaking the stuck unconscious patterns of belief is really important. And that's why when you say, Ratsuko, you're into this space of questioning everything, like inside I'm like, hallelujah. Others might go this whole, oh, you know, you must get rid of doubt and bullshit. Like you have to destroy all your beliefs, and to the
Yeah.
extent that you can do that is the extent with which you can face reality clean and perceive it for what it is, rather than bringing a whole baggage of narratives that then are tied into political agendas throughout history. You know,
Yeah.
that's enlightenment, actually facing reality and seeing it for what it is, rather than all these stories coming along, and many of them you didn't even choose to put there.
Thank you.
Huh.
Thank you. I can't often talk about this, you know, to the normal, like to the average person, but it's my channel, so I'm talking about whatever I want to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to listen, you listen. If you don't, you don't. But I think that you can, for me now, I'm thinking, you know what, I can give meaning to whatever I want to give meaning, the meaning I want to give it. If
Yeah.
that makes sense. You know, I
Yeah.
don't have to give meaning to this because I've been led to believe this is the meaning that I
Yeah.
should give it. Whether
Yeah.
that means the relationship to my parents, my friends, whatever idea, concept, like I can, whatever I want it to mean, it can mean whatever I want it to mean.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can switch that. So today it might be, the real flexibility of the yogi is in the ability to reposition their inner belief space on the spot. So it might be that in this context, it's prudent. What's the word? Expedient. It's convenient and useful, expedient to believe this. But then you step over here, and now it's suddenly like there's a different context you're presented with, and it's very convenient and prudent to believe something is hardly different. And can you shift can belief be a tool of interfacing different realities rather than a fixed set of rules that you then like blindly obey? And that's an ontological nuclear bomb. That's like most people believe that belief is reality is a certain way, and I believe it to be this way because I don't know, people told me to, or some fictitious person from the past I believe, I've never met, said something, wrote
Some
something
girl.
down that may have not even been them, and now I'm believing it, right? Like most people believe that belief is fixed, and then that's why you get wars, right? These people believe that their God is the thing and everybody else is evil, and these people believe the same, and nobody's willing to just say screw it, drop the belief. But to the mystic, belief is just, there is no reality. There is no fixed reality. There is no singular truth. There can't be. Like, if you can put it into words, then it isn't truth, right? That's what Guru Singh said once, if sat, this word that means ultimate truth kind of thing, if you can put it into words, it's not sat. Like, because it's something that's infinite, can't be encapsulated in form. So, it's kind of effectively the same as saying there is no absolute truth. It's all context relative. So like belief then doesn't, it becomes only useful as something that you choose to accept within context, knowing that it has no real reality, and therefore you're free to drop it. And there are practices that are all about that. I think it's called Abhinaya Yoga. It gets some mention in some text, is basically the denial of ego yoga. And most people don't really, they use ego to mean like rude person or arsehole kind of thing, but real ego is about like what you identify with. And the thing people mostly identify with is their beliefs. So I believe I support the ecology, or I believe that, I don't know, the conservatives are evil. I believe that Jesus Christ is the savior. Identity is based. I'm that person who believes that. I believe I'm a heterosexual. I believe I'm a this. Your identity is based in that. But like to the mystic, your identity. To the practice of denying the ego is to shatter those. They're like mirror, and just shatter it, right? So you might like. I remember this one practice that comes from the chaos magic space that's recommended. It's like, tomorrow wake up and you're an evangelical Christian and do everything an evangelical Christian would do. Go try to like win people and really own and believe it, believe it. And then you go to bed and wake up the next day. You're a materialist atheist and you don't believe any of this woo BS and you don't, blah, blah. And you wake up the next day and something else. In a way, it's like, you could say, oh, what do? I act it? And that's the profoundness where theater and ritual come back together, is that actors are actually, we're all acting. The question is whether or not, how aware are we that this personality layer we've constructed, or we've been working on that role a long time. We're like, oh, it didn't work there, I'll tweak it this way. That got me, I'm going to tweak it this way. And now you think it's you, but it's not. It's just a bloody role you're stuck in. You can't even play any other roles. So can you play, the denial, the loosening the grip of ego is like, how well can you just shift? Like, can you embarrass yourself in public is like usually a good sign of how, if that's the most terrifying concept to you whatsoever, you've got some work to do, because you're attached to your personality layer, and it's not very, it's maybe a bit weak in certain places. But that's what enlightenment is. It's not like finding some new set of rules that are better. It's destruction of all the rules, all the shackles that you blindly abide by. So you're free to make your own in the moment.
Yeah. And I think I did take some inspiration from a bit of Stoicism. And I can't believe who, but he was in a Nazi prison, and then I don't know his name, but he decided how they can do all these things to me, but I can decide how I want to react in my mind. How I want to respond. And I thought, wow, there's so many circumstances in everyday life that, which would normally sometimes it's still, I notice my immediate reaction. I'm like, wait a minute, I want to retell the meaning of this in my mind in a different way, so I can respond in different and choose to respond in a different way than how I would just. And sometimes I just, like, if I'm angry, I'll just be angry and be like the other day I was holding my phone and this guy like swam past on his cycle and tried to get my phone off me, and I had it so tight. I was like, and I was just like going off at him like, how dare you do that, He's like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, don't tell me sorry. I know what you were trying. He's like, I thought you were my friend. I'm like, no, I was just like laying at him, because sometimes that's just like my innate response. Going at it. And I think it's necessary as well to have that. But then the next minute I'm like, okay, do I want to carry this thought with me for the rest of my day, or do I want to just switch it up? And I don't want to let that moment that I felt triggered and angry to have ripple effect on the rest of my day, and have the thought, oh my god, if I lost my phone, because I don't have a laptop, right? Everything is on my phone. And I thought, oh my god, like, how am I going to recover this? It will be a big headache for me. And I thought, no, it'll be fine. Just be calm, be focused, everything will be okay, and just continue as normal. Like, not erase the memory, but just not let that it was literally 20 seconds of stress in my life. Ripple into ruin the rest of the 23 hours of my day, 24 hours of my day, essentially, right?
And then in that moment you can shift into like a narrative, like, for instance, that gosh, what kind of like sort of upbringing would be such that you'd feel like that it was compelling to go and just sort of like steal shit from people randomly, kind of thing. So probably not the nicest, so you can kind of find a compassion space after your anger. That point about like the anger too is what I was thinking is, just because you then claim the autonomy to be able to position yourself creatively in relation to an event doesn't mean you always have to choose like the nice version. It might be that you need to go through a time, and I've been through this, where I've spent initially too much time trying to like tell the story in a way that sounds really great. Like, there's a whole thing now around like being a victim, and it's like, yes, a lot of people get stuck in being a victim, but the kind of new age overreaction is that people don't spend enough time sometimes acknowledging their victimhood. And I had a period where I did this in relation to an event in my life, and I realized at one point I needed to position myself to be like a really rage at being victimized by this experience, and that allowed me to then reach the stuff that was in me regardless, because this is the danger of this kind of spiritual bypass thing, where you think, oh, it's all about being positive, so I then try to tell every story as positive, but your conscious mind's doing it, but below you there's a whole unconscious mind that is not buying it. It's like, sorry, too painful, not buying it. And so you create this rift in yourself, and you deny yourself the access to real healing. So to enter into that space, maybe even just temporarily, like maybe I'm doing some sort of emotional release process, and then in that process I allow myself to express the full extent of the rage, even like hearing myself say things or or levels of energy in reaction to it that it might even shock me, that, you know, I would never do like openly in public kind of thing. But like, I can then leave it. I can then, like, you know, the process finishes and I can come back to a narrative of like, well, that person did, you know, the best they could with what they had, and, you know, they were suffering, and I can see that really genuinely. And they can both exist. And allowing yourself, you know, full scope, again, it's like the authority is what you know you need. What is your like bodily intelligence telling you need right now? Is it telling you everything's great, or is it saying there's something's a little bit off? Is it saying that you're actually upset when your mind's trying to create a story that it's all right? Or is it, you know, is your body kind of okay and your mind's sort of caught up in something? Bodily intelligence is a very powerful guide. That's, you know, that's intuition, really. Intuition can be a bit of a enigmatic concept, but bodily intelligence is intuition. Like, it's the knowing without having to come up with the reasons.
And I think
And
that's what yoga helps. And I think yoga helps me, like, also being like mentally flexible, right? Because you could say this is mental flexibility at its finest, not being able to allow that anger that I had for 20 seconds to influence the rest of my day. And it doesn't happen all the time like that. Sometimes I do carry these things, you know, I'm still working on it. But that is what I'm now enjoying more about the yoga practice, is the mental flexibility aspect that it brings in life, and making that translate like off the mat in everyday life through circumstances and experiences. And using the innate intelligence that our body knows, like tapping it, like our body knows how to heal itself. Our body knows how. For me, it was doubting that. I doubted my ability to heal myself, and always, and sometimes still do, like seek externally, when really, like, it's just go internally to where in my body, in my mind, and in the subconscious I'm holding that energy and unweeding my garden. So pulling out those weeds so I can attract, or I say grow, things that I want to plant in my garden.
Yeah, and that's back to that, like, being emotionally current. It means, like, you know, your topsoil doesn't have a bunch of weeds in it, so when something gets planted in it, you experience that rather than something else.
Yeah, and I think when I haven't done that, I notice that when I'm triggered, I'm more in a hole, like in a deep hole, and I need like almost a bulldozer to come out and pull those weeds. If I don't do that daily practice of unweeding, or sometimes it's not yoga always for me. Sometimes it could be rollerblading, or going for a walk, or being in nature, playing with my dog that I have, you know, well, my housemate's dog, you know, playing with an animal, but whatever that process is of unweeding, if I don't do that, then I'm hit. If I notice I'm more affected, like later on, and then I have to do the big work.
And that is the benefit, of a regular practice, and yoga is a great practice for that, is connecting you to your body and the sense of it more, and also kind of opening up, because things get trapped physically in you. You know, you see people as they get older, often their shoulders roll, their chest collapses down, and their heart becomes closed. There's no coincidence that the physical mirrors that energetic process. So things in yoga tend to reverse that, right? You'll do like camel pose, and your heart's expanded and your chest's open, and so that can bring the things that are buried to the surface enough that you then can have a sense of what's really going on in you. And that, that's powerful. It's important to have a sense of what's really going on in you.
And I know I really enjoyed hearing your perspective on that, but on liminal yoga, like, what would you say happens during a liminal yoga session?
Yeah, it varies. But the components I'll tell you, the components that I'm bringing in, the format can vary, and as we were discussing before, but the first thing is bringing, like, seeing the imagination as like in a sense, a muscle to develop. So, you know, doing like simple things like, and often interspersing that with exercises. So you get the energy body moving, get the blood flowing, you get, you know, the body moving, physical body. And then rather than sort of having moments in between doing nothing, like there'll be this little mini imaginal exercise. Like, I don't know, one I quite like is, you know, imagine that you hold your hands, you've got a sphere, like a ball, and imagine you've got like a wooden ball, and feel it. And then now it's like a, you know, it's made of, it's steel, it's heavy, it's cold. Now it's like glass, and you can even try to look through it. And now it's like feather and soft and light, you know. So you're really simple things that begin to develop the imagination, and then often that will progress into maybe like scenarios, immersive scenarios, or maybe with some open-ended elements, like, you know, there's a symbol on the door, take note of it, but I don't say what the symbol is. So beginning to try to let the space show you something rather than it being created by your will. The other element that I'm trying to bring in is an anchoring of the yoga practice in the kind of Western cultural context a bit. And part of that is bringing in like mythologies that are relevant to the land, like here, particularly in Southwest England, there's the kind of like Arthurian and stuff, or the kind of the fair folk legends and things like that. So, I mean, you know, like for Halloween that we just had, I did this kind of Yoga Nidra-esque guided journey that involved the banquet hall on the top of, in Ireland, there's this called the Hill of Tara. And there's a whole story of like the banquet they were having on Halloween. And then they had this person from the other world would come and like burn the whole village every Halloween, and then eventually this hero comes and kind of puts an end to it. And so it was a little bit of a slice of that mythology. It's really rich and kind of speaks in different symbolic layers. Like, what is that about? You know, someone comes and burns the whole village, but it gets renewed. But it's and then somebody else comes along that shares similar blood and it stops it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there beyond our rational mind. So bringing in those stories of old, as well as modern. So we're also part of a modern context. You know, our culture is also a modern culture. Like they didn't have iPhones and Netflix, you know, 50, 100 years ago. So like, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just about return to old ways. Like we can't, we're as we are. But bringing in like, so rather than it being just all about like taking another culture and elevating that in its status, like, you know, for instance, whether it be Buddhist culture or Hindu culture, not excluding those as options into it, but like I think doing some work to reclaim our culture in a way, particularly, and it doesn't matter whether you're born in England or you have English blood, if you're living on the soil here or in America or in South America, wherever it is, like your culture consists of many intersections. There's your genetics and your blood, which in my case has like 3 major components from entirely different parts of the world. And there's where you live. So, you know, I grew up in America, I've been living in England for a long time. And this is just where you kind of resonate with, which might be independent of them all. Maybe you really like Taoist culture. You don't have any Chinese or you know, Taiwanese or whatever in you whatsoever, but something that speaks to you that may relate to part of you beyond that. So like acknowledging that, and particularly Western culture, has just been kind of ignored. And there's rich spiritual currents in the lands and in the stories and in even the practices that remain if you just do a little digging. So I'm trying to re-elevate that a bit because it gives you a strength to, you know, I just often think when you read some of like Indian poetry and it'll reference animals that we don't have here, like the chatrik bird or something like that sings whenever there's rain or something like that. It's like, it's beautiful, but like I have no reference point to that. But the crow, I see those guys every day. You know, so I have a sense of them and I know what they're like. I know what they sound like.
Like, they need to be opposed about the cockroach. I mean, those guys last the test of time.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
they're like warriors.
So there's an anchoring in when you can relate to the land around you and see the mysticism in it, rather than your mystical life being all about your kind of coarse imagination of another culture you've never really experienced. You know, so
Yeah.
that's a big part of what I'm trying to do is bring Western mythos into a yoga practice. And so yeah, so you know, there can be dancing, asana, kriya type exercises, meditations, visualizations, generally some sort of relaxation, because we all need that, but often quite an active one, of relaxing the body in quite active ways in a way, and some bit of journeying. So yeah, the journeying element really is a big part of it, which you might call shamanistic, I guess.
And what would you say are like the key benefits of liminal yoga?
Reclaiming your sovereignty over 1/3 of your, well, probably, they say the subconscious is 80% of your brain. I don't know how they derive to that, but the subconscious is a huge component of what you think. You're choosing things for very rational reasons, but you're not. You're choosing them based on impulses and desires, and they all stem from that world. And as long as we're entirely unfamiliar with it, then others have power over us that we don't know, whether they be people of our past or scenarios of our past or modern media adverts or whatever it is. So reclaiming agency is a big part, and also just exploring the magic. Like, I think what for me drives me and always has, and is why I studied physics, and then why I abandoned that and went into Kundalini Yoga and all that, was like this deep inspiration of like the mystical reality that there is, the really perceiving the magic in this reality right here and now. Like, when you touch that, it's so empowering and it's so motivating that you can never go back to like a truly mundane existence. You just never would. And I've had some deep experiences through various things in my life that I still reflect on and still fuel me forward. Like they still drive my passion. And to live a passionate life is the only life worth living. It doesn't mean you have to go out and proclaim it to the world if that's not maybe you're more of an introvert, but like to feel that your heart is like open to the world and eager and intrigued and desires to embrace it. That's where satisfaction comes from. So liminal yoga is about touching magic in reality in a very real way.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I love that. I love that you're in control, like, of your reality and your perception of reality, and you're hacking. You become like a very quick hacker through this practice. I mean, it's so powerful, but I feel like it's a really powerful, and it's such a genius aspect that you can build in other areas of your life, right? But it's not really talked about, not really explored in a conventional yoga class, right? Which is so heavily asana based. And can you share some liminal yoga exercises that people could practice?
Yeah, I'll share. I wanted to share a very simple thing, so that you can do. It's nice to do upon waking, but you can really do it anytime you have a few minutes. So I'll just take you into it, and then you can kind of do it on your own. So maybe take a breath, and make a sound as you exhale. As you relax the body again. Whatever sound your body wants to make. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be a classic sigh from the movies. Give your body a little shake. Then close your eyes and just be comfortable as however you're seated. It doesn't matter. And try to look. Your eyes are closed, but behind your eyelids, they're still seeing. So try to look at behind your eyelids, like very physically. Try to look at the physical space that is what your eyes are perceiving right now. Like it may be black or other colors, and blood might see red if you're in the sunlight like I am, or whatever it is, see it. And then one thing interesting to try, your eyes are physically closed. We're not talking about that. Try to close those eyes that are seeing right now, as if you have like another set of eyelids in there somehow. And just notice how that changes the quality of what you're seeing. And then go back to staring at the physical eyelids, behind the eyelids. And again, try to close those inner eyes and see how that, you might even like physically squeeze your eyes harder just as an instinct, and that's fine. And the other way you can kind of get into that works better for some is to imagine that behind your eyes, you have another set of eyes, maybe like an inch or two behind them, and try to look out through those eyes. And then again, alternate and try and then look out through your physical eyes. And then the other eyes, and physical eyes. And this is a little exercise to tune you into really what is the third eye vision. And that's the one that perceives the liminal realm. So then the thing you can do, you can play with that. And the exercise upon waking is to sit up, get comfortable, and then just stare into that space, either one, and wait for the first like visual impression you get, or even audible impression. Some people more clairaudient. And whatever it is, just wait patiently. You're not trying to make it. There's no rush. It doesn't happen. That's no big deal. I'll tell you what to do. And wait for it. And then when you get it, open your eyes and write it down or draw it. And it may be something totally absurd. And in fact, if it is, then that's usually the sign that it's come to you rather than you've made it up in a way, even though that space can get a bit blurry. Like this morning I did this, and the first thing I saw after about a couple minutes was a parking lot with like 4 or 5 Jeep-like cars in it, and then a purple blanket draped over this fence. Totally random piece of thing, but like I wasn't thinking about cars, parking lots, and purple blankets. Like that was a vision that came. And the point of this exercise is merely to develop that experience of receiving an image, which is quite a profound thing when you taste that. It's like, whoa, I don't know what that was. I don't know where that came from. Well, it came from the imaginal realm, and you perceived it with your third eye, your inner vision. And sometimes it helps to like stare at that physical eye level, I find, almost to the point of fatigue, and then that drops me into like the third eye, liminal vision space. And sometimes it's better just to go right there. But that little exercise will attune you to that.
And I like that first exercise. I practiced that first exercise as you were saying. And
Yeah.
what I liked about that is I was in control. Like when you said, look at my eyelid, and then close what's looking at the eyelid. I thought, wow, like if I just practice that, I can change like a lens, my eyes, and what I want to see without seeing.
Yes. Yeah. That this is a very real, like, I don't know, physical or maybe beyond physical thing. Like it's not subtle. It's a very real like shift in perception tier between these and there. And that's basic. That's like basic human, it's like you've got fingers to grab things, you've got, eyes to see physical space, and you've got inner eye to see liminal space. Like it should be like known to us from the earliest of age.
And it makes me think of Beethoven and how he composed music even when he was deaf.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because he was able to tap into this realm.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
When you get like, there are times, and the fidelity of that inner vision space can be variable, but there are times where it is so high fidelity that like you are looking onto an inner scene, and you can move your eyes around and see different parts of the scene, and you can kind of like zoom in a way and curiously inspect parts of a scene that has such a distinct feel of not being of you, of being something you're witnessing rather than something your mind is creating. And it's the same across all the senses. So, I've had dreams where I've composed songs, and I've woken up and like recorded the melodies and the parts. And it's like, well, how does the mind do that? No, that it isn't really. Or what is the mind is the real question. But like you're perceiving you're witnessing something. You're not creating it in the same way that I say, think of a pink elephant, and then you kind of think, well, elephants looks like this, and the pink one would look like that. It's not that. It's receptive rather than active. Yeah, and no doubt where the source of creativity and genius comes from.
Yeah, and that just, I don't know, I felt like Beethoven did that. Like, even though he was deaf, he could
Yeah,
tap into creating music that is genius.
yeah.
Mm.
And most physicists who totally changed the course of physics had those experiences. The guy who came up with the idea of like magnetic field lines, you see magnet with the field lines they draw around it. That was a dream. He was working on this stuff, and he had a dream. He took a nap, had a dream, and had a vision of these field lines going everywhere. And he woke up and he was
Okay.
like, Eureka.
I work in MRI.
There you go. So
So
look how that influenced reality.
yeah. And it all starts with like, and that's one of the quotes that I saw from PJ Carroll on your website is, as sunlight obscures stars by day, so does wakefulness obscure the fact that we are still dreaming.
Yeah, I love this. I love this quote because I just immediately recognized it as true, and it made me remember experiences I had that you see this, if you meditate in the middle of the day, you eventually can see that there's this whole other like dream narrative going on. And it's not that we used to think, mostly think we wake up and the dream stops and then consciousness begins, but no, it's that the consciousness is a kind of bright light that outshines the more dim light of the dream space, but the dream space is still going on. And this has echoes in a lot of places, like this really quite mind-bending of a book called Dictionary of the KHAZARS by this is he like Yugoslavian or Latvian writer. It's all about like that. It's a fiction book, the mind bender of a book, but it's basically that. There's like two stories running, and it's about the person's double, and the doppelganger from kind of German like mythos is there. Like we're running parallel lives as we're awake, and they're informing each other, and we're unaware of it. So that quote, yeah, like the stars are still there. It's just the sun's bright, so you can't see them.
Yeah.
They're still shining just as bright as they were at night. Your dreams are playing out just as strongly as they were at night. It's just you're awake now, so you're not tuned into that reality.
Yeah, I like that quote a lot.
Yeah. PJ
And
Carroll is an ontological nuclear bomb, actually. He'll blow apart your worldviews and belief systems if you let him.
wow.
Just a few very pithy books.
I'm in my own process of blowing my own belief systems right now, and it must say like it is. I do spend a lot of time like in solitude to create the space to formulate my own thoughts, my own perceptions. It is by consciously choosing not to go out. I don't know if you've experienced that. Like you want to spend time in solitude.
I know, I really do. And right now, it's a little bit hard, just the way things are. That's partly why I moved to Devon, actually, was to be able to get out into places like Dartmoor, where there is lots of space and no people if you want there to be. Yeah, solitude is important to balance with the rest of your social needs.
Not that, like, I find that, coming to the UK from Australia, like, it is, a part of me does feel like to survive, yeah, I do need a group of, like, to be social. It's a survival instinct, right? But there's a huge part of me that resists it and wants to really be in solitude to explore, to uncondition myself right now from the conditioning, that I've experienced more so than ever before. Funny, maybe lockdown had that impact. If we go into lockdown, I won't be that sad. I mean, I'll be a little bit sad, but maybe I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm just gonna do that work.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a sign. I mean, it's different for different people, obviously, if you live on your own or versus with others. But Yeah, if the idea of being kind of your social life reducing down to nothing doesn't terrify you, then it's probably a yeah, to the degree it does. Spending time your own, basically. Some people, that's the greatest terror imaginable. And if that's you, then okay, like acknowledge that. Say it out loud. Like, spending time on my own is the most terrifying thing I can imagine. And then know that like in the exploration of that space, there's going to be rich experience and reclaiming your personal power. And it may have to be gentle, and you may need some help, and you may need some therapy, you may need some somatic work, you may need to journal a lot to understand what's informing that. But like, that's a rich place to explore. So, if you recognize that about yourself, you're in a good place, but don't ignore it. And if you're a person that's craving solitude, get it. And I feel like now we need to, I'm realizing now, I have a daughter, which I need to go pick up right now, actually.
Oh, okay.
But I'm realizing, like, for me to get that, what I need, I'm not going to be able to retire to the Himalayas anytime soon. And nor would I want to necessarily. I love life and culture. But I also need that. I need extremeness in that. So I'm going to have to just start choreographing, like, week-long retreats in nature with nobody around in my life, like 3-4 times a year. And like others would plan a holiday, and it is an essential piece of self-maintenance and spiritual exploration. And do that. It's easy enough to do. We're not so crowded yet in the world. As long save up some money. It's a really cheap holiday. Just get a cabin where nobody else wants to go, and
In nature, ideally. But
there.
Brian, if you have the time, the last thing I wanted to ask is about what you've gained from the corpus hermetica.
Oh my God! The last thing I want to ask is about the hermetica. As above, so below. Any pattern you see on nature is a reflection of the divine. So this is, to me, one of the interesting things about modern spirituality is it's very transcendental. So they talk about humans, because obviously you have to, and talk about the oneness, the infinite God, whatever. And then there's nothing in between. Well, where on earth does nature model that? Nature has everything. It has has algae, it has moss, it has plants, it has trees, it has little organisms, big organisms, and everything in between. Every gradient. Nature does gradients. So spirituality does gradients too. There are spirits that are kind of like, akin to your sophistication. There are spirits that are collective group spirits, egregores. There's like, kind of, nowadays we call angel intelligence, or kind of collective, like archangel. Like, there's a whole pantheon of spiritual entity between us and the infinite. There has to be, because as above, so below. It's fundamental. And a lot of culture had a lot to say about that, particularly in the Western tradition, both across the world, and certainly in the modern day, that our rehash of spirituality is missing the spirits. My modern definition of spirituality is how familiar are you and how well do you interact with the spirits of these various non-physical realms. And so that's the most famous line from the Corpus Hermeticum, I think. But again, that's also like a big part of our spiritual culture in the West, the kind of Egyptian, European magical tradition is rooted in the Hermetica, which has wisdom that's quite possibly rooted to tens of thousands of years, if not further, older. So a good piece of text to get familiar with. And there's the kind of modern is in the early 1900s book called the KYBALIon. Do I have that right? The KYBALIon, written by the three initiates. KYBALION will get you close enough. Written by the three initiates. Probably a product of Golden Dawn type people, but like it's a kind of like easy access summary of the wisdom of the Hermetica. So that's a really great little short, inspiring read, and recognize that it comes through the area of kind of colonialism and class consciousness. So you have to sort of normalize all that BS out. Yeah, this is our spiritual heritage, folks. Like, if you live in an English-speaking country or European-speaking country, like it or not, like, and it's rich and it's great to have it all. It's it's not either or. It's both and more. Do yoga, learn about Vedic philosophy, really rich and powerful stuff. But then also learn about like the Hermetica, and the Western magical traditions and chaos magic. Such a rich movement from the 70s of ontology contemplations and practices. So yeah, that's my big thing with that. It's like learn about our rich treasures of our cultures. And just thinking spirituality all comes from the East.
Thank you. What is like one thing that you have gained from the corpus hermetica that you can, that's easily digestible for us?
Other than that thing, first thing that comes to mind is like this, the emergence of the universe from the primordial chaos. There's this whole like watery motif of the origins of things, and chaos has a bad rap as a word. And when people first hear about chaos magic, they think it's all about like destruction and things, but it's not. It's a recognition that like the power that fuels the universe is like wild and alive, and the part of you that's wild and alive is most attuned to the heights of spirituality. So like figure out how to be a bit more wild and alive in your life. Yeah, that's the early scenes. Creation emerges from the primordial darkness and it's chaos, and it kind of materializes into reality. Like I love that bit, and that comes up in a lot of different places, not just Hermetica. I must go.
I love that. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love
wow,
that.
Wonderful chat.
Yes, and can you let us know how people can contact you?
Yes. My link tree is on my bio. Linktree/Brian Quinn, BRIQUINN, and you can email me at briquinn@pm.me, as in protonmail.me. Yeah, I will look forward to hearing from you.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Sending much love to you and the family.
Thank you. Lots of love to you.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining, if you've had the time and patience to watch all of that. And yeah, I hope you gain something that fuels your imagination. I'll save this now. Bye.